Bene, possiamo cominciare?
Per me sì.
Bene, grazie, buonasera, è con grande onore e oltre che piacere che
Great pleasure and honor that would like to welcome you to this third day. And in this meeting, the threefold seeing in the world, we are participating with the society created by Professor Florin, and our aim is to expand our educational commitment even beyond these universities. So we cooperate with other organizations to this very aim. After this very short welcome, I might now remind you the rules of the game. That is, you all have 15 minutes for your presentations, and then 5 minutes before the end of your presentation, you will be warned about the time. So thanks. I would like to thank you all the guests taking part in this day's work. Well, I would like now to start with the first presentation by Professor Augustin Sali. He teaches at the University of Sofia, and he's also trustee for general affairs at Sofia University. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. I am Sali Augustin, as I am introduced, and I'm talking from Tokyo. The time now here, it is 11 at night, and I hope you are all keeping well. I am going to share my PowerPoint here. Is it functioning well?
Yes.
Okay, my topic today, as I am asked to talk about the possibility of thinking about the global studies that we are involved in Sofia University and interdisciplinary pedagogy. So my content is from area studies to global studies, which I have been involved in. Going beyond traditional demarcations of academic disciplines. So in that sense, I will talk about area studies as an experience of mine as I started my research, and area studies and global studies. Now I'm working at the global studies faculty. And I will have some reflection on interdisciplinary pedagogy in that field, an academic approach study of life and lives. Now, you must have been familiar with the Korean song Gangnam Style, published in 2012, and a song that provided ironic commentary on the lavish lifestyles associated with the South Korean elite became the first video to receive 1 billion hits on YouTube, as the remarkable power of social media. And Bono, the singer, becomes popular and meeting UN Secretary General and so on and so forth, talking about politics and society and culture and so on and so forth. In a book called Social Cultural Foundations in Global Studies, points out the interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary academic field known as global studies is uniquely positioned to make sense of this kind of cultural phenomenon by connecting its cultural aspects with a whole set of broader social, political, and economic processes. This is one way of looking at it. Now, from my experience of area studies to global studies is that since 2000, I started to study on the issues of violent conflicts in India. And that led to the field of area studies of the graduate program of area studies at Sophia University. In my studies on communal violence in India, it was a puzzle to investigate the interactions of various academic disciplines in riot-prone area and in a violent riot. Anthropology, politics, religion, culture, economics, psychology, theology, philosophy, all these were involved in the riot-prone and in a violent riot itself. A critical investigation focused on interdisciplinary pedagogy is a fundamental undertaking for the clarification of the existing situation and strategy development for the future. And this is my starting point of my research. When I was there in the area studies, it is said that area studies is not a case study for a specific academic discipline, but a multidisciplinary approach to comprehensively understand a specific area of the world. And therefore, we had to use various academic disciplines, but one of them as a tool to analyze the area. Area studies means we were focusing on Southeast Asian studies, Middle Eastern studies, and African studies. These were the areas that we were focusing here, but there are other European studies and Latin American studies. And we had to understand area studies as a collective term of those studies for a specific area, joint research. But recent trend is that there is a challenge to conventional concept of area. The conventional area studies has been much more challenged by several new approaches since the end of Cold War. The concept of area studies, area like Southeast Asia, the Middle East, East Asia, has emerged in the development of area studies in the United States after Second World War. The new approach is like taking issues like migration and refugees, Islamic area, and Somia, gender studies, and so on. The continued extension of capitalism along with the social relations associated with it, the growth of markets, neoliberalism, new information and transportation technologies demanded new approaches of intellectual culture. And then in our university in 2016, Sophia established a new department. It is called the Department of Global Studies, and now I am involved in that. The research and education in the Faculty of Global Studies integrates international relations, which was one of the disciplines that we had already, and area studies into the quest for global studies. The field of international relations includes two branches, international politics and civil society, and international cooperation. Area studies includes the two branches of Asia and Asian and Middle East and Africa. We combine it together because it's close by there. Joining the global and local perspectives aims for a multi-dimensional understanding of the world. That is the concept that we started. And we also take it as an understanding of the world three-dimensionally: international relations, area studies, and using one of the disciplines, and we call it to global studies of Sophia University. And in this three-dimensional aspect, we say a triad for the pursuit of global studies. International relations focus on world movements viewed from a global or bird's eye perspective. Yet most problems arising on the local level are also linked to global phenomena. uniting the global and local perspectives enables us to view the world comprehensively and comprehend it with a superior level of clarity. Through a blending of the bird's eye vision and global insight provided by international relations and meticulous inquiry into the livelihood and customs of people inhabiting the manifold area of the globe, the research and education offered at FGS, Faculty of Global Studies, seeks to pursue an objective comprehension of our globalized world. This is our multidisciplinary approach. And we have already we had the graduate studies in this field. Now, study of life and lives is in the effort of global studies. It is an emergent and integrative field of knowledge that includes both disciplinary and traditional transdisciplinary elements. It builds upon and synthesizes the work of traditional disciplines. We are not neglecting the traditional disciplines while also seeking to build a new intellectual architecture. And there are the realms of epistemology, how knowledge is understood, and methodology, how knowledge is pursued. The second point is global studies is about viewing the world in terms of what might be called the multi-scaled relationality of global process. Looking at globe as a complex global local dynamics whose effects are unevenly distributed across scales, spaces, and social groups. The third point is that global studies begins from the premise that contemporary global processes cannot be fully understood without examining their deep historical roots. So we have to find the historical roots also, interwoven with their political and economic elements. Another point I would like to focus is in identifying particular processes to investigate. Global studies scholars rely as much on thematic foci. That's what I said earlier, focusing on migration, violence, identity, and so on in a global perspective. They do on traditional geographic and disciplinary categories. The fifth point is that GS seeks to support ongoing efforts to challenge and transcend Eurocentrism, the systematic privileging of viewpoints. It's a critical approach, narratives and categories derived from Europe or even the United States. A kind of bottom-up angle of vision that makes a special effort to view global structures and relationships from the margins. And then the final point is that global studies is deeply shaped by intellectual traditions for which the critical analysis of knowledge structures themselves goes hand in hand with the critical analysis of the social world. The reference is there in the social and cultural foundations of global studies. And we also make a lot of case studies. For example, I have made some of the examples here, global new media, how Global South is changing the global news media landscape, like, for example, the traditional BBC, CNN, and so on, is challenged by Al Jazeera, and so on and so forth. Indigenous people and intellectual property rights, NGOs, humanitarian and cultural construction of global hierarchy, climate change and changing global imageries, the Islamic veil and global politics of gender, state, corporate, underground voices in global hip hop, global solidarity movements, yoga and a new secular spirituality, transnational LGBTQ and identities, and so on. These are some of the case studies. For example, I'm going to take one case here, how to look at some of the issues in a global perspective while integrating other disciplines. According to ILGA, the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersexual Association, in some countries and regions in the world, being a sexual minority is a punishable offense, even capital punishment. While this map shows diversity of protection against discrimination and criminalization of consensual same-sex sexual orientation or acts between adults, this blue color and the gradation will show that the protection against discrimination based on sexual orientation, while the reddish color will provide the criminalization of consensual same-sex sexual acts between adults. So in the world, there are different positions in the countries. In this issue of SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identities, may be a content of the global studies from various academic disciplines. My reflections on interdisciplinary pedagogy is that global studies scholars are challenged to carry out new combinations in the crowded academic markets by introducing new research questions that demand alternative theories and new methods, or that employ existing tools in new directions in order to offer alternative structures for the production of knowledge. And therefore, there are questions to be explored, such as what are some of the classes being taught in a global human perspective, and what would we like to see? How do we understand the spectrum of different kinds of new topics in a local global perspective today? Is there platforms for interdisciplinary pedagogy, including investigations through reference to collaborative work between theology, social science, and natural sciences? Can individuals who can broker across the structural holes that exist between bodies of ideas, while the ideas and opinions are likely to be homogeneous within groups, individuals who are connected to multiple groups across structural holes offer alternative and innovative points of view, or as Bert put it, good ideas. And that's for the short reflection I have to make. And these are some of the references I have made: Social and Cultural Foundations in Global Studies, which is a new, very, very relevant book to understand the interdisciplinary approach of global studies. And yes, it is time, and thank you very much.
Thank you. You are on perfect time. Thank you for this very interesting contribution on global studies and interdisciplinary pedagogy. And now I leave the floor to Dr. Luis Badilla Morales. Dr. Luis Badilla Morales, I now speak in Italian, è un giornalista cileno, responsabile del sito di informazione
Who is a journalist from Chile. He's a minister out in Chile, and he has been working at Vatican Radio for many years. So give the floor to Mr. Luis Badilla. So thanks for your invitation. I hope that with my very short presentation, I might give a contribution. So after the Spanish philosopher José once wrote in a book dedicated to Don Quixote. So what is my position? I cannot save myself. These very few words are very clear. are very famous, and they might help us in my opinion to understand the very nature of our human beings. There is a fundamental unity not only of a single being, but also unity of all the human beings, the unity of humankind. So it is not a sort of closed humankind. This principle is clear and it is true for any person, but it has to be related to the reality in which every person lives. And this reality is something concrete. It is the place, the time where we can find the other. So in this reality, I am there, and then I can find my neighbor. And in this place, I can find my unity with others. And then the circumstances are also important. That is the conditions in which I live and which make up my reality. So the true reality starts with a gaze. In this space, I can look at the other, and the other person can look at me. We don't know what are the beings living on Mars or Jupiter. Obviously, we cannot wonder about other spaces and other times. The only thing that really exists is what we can see and touch. So the gaze is very important. So we must now wonder, what do we mean by truth? Benedict XVI in Brazil just raised the same question in front of many people in Latin America. And here, now I want to read a quote. So Benedict answered the question, that is, what is reality? So he said, we might answer this question by another question, that is, what is real for the other, for my neighbor? It is just, reality is just made up of common goods, what we can see, what we can touch. And there, Benedict XVI just attacked the main trends of the last century. So he attacked Marxism and other trends, movements of the last century. And so he, on the contrary, referred to God as the only source of our reality. And as a consequence to this, we can just find the solutions in God. So hence he rejected any false alternatives. Those who know God can know reality, and we can respond in this way, in an adequate way, to the challenges posed by reality. So this is what Pope Benedict said. Can I say, by following this thought, that which is not only the thought of a pope or of a theologian, but this is a sort of a pervasive thought of our time. It is God who is in each one of us, and who, through the gift of life that is given to all, in a specific reality, in my specific circumstances, which are specific of my being, I can really define my own self. So life, the life of each person is inseparable from reality, and everything is possible to the very extent in which reality is related to God. So I am with the other because the other exists, and my neighbor exists because I'm there. So there is a reciprocity. That is why, directly and indirectly, this element is recurrent in the wide-ranging work by Pope Benedict. So now, what is the link between myself and the circumstances? What kind of dialogue can we find between the self and the reality? So what is the link between any human being and the surrounding reality? So Romano Guardini just told us that the link is to be found in the gaze. A gaze is not a sort of prison, is not a limitation, but the gaze is a sort of epiphany. With the word, with the gaze, and within the gaze, we can approach by the neighbor's reality. We can be with the other person. And John Paul II, who was another great pontiff, said, "The way of the church is mad, because men's rights are God's rights." This is what he said. I don't know what is the time. I had, so I don't know, maybe just a few minutes. So in the second part of my presentation, in order to reach my conclusions, I would like to say that there is a necessity which consists in the capability of evoking that gaze. So the very question is how the institutions, philosophy, science, teach us how to look at. So the way we look is something very important. It is something that can be taught and learned at the same time. So in order to evoke a gaze, we must be able to reorient our eyes. So how do we have to look at the other? What kind of look, what kind of gaze? And it is in this way, in this modality, that we can even find an answer. So superficial gaze just leads to superficial conclusions. So there is patience that is needed. So let's say the gaze should always be focused on our belly. Just let me use this word. That is why Pope Francis, in order to quote another pontiff, often speaks about the peripheries, and he says that reality can better be seen and found in the peripheries of the world. And I have to say that this is a leitmotif in France's work. This is also a different way of educating our gaze. So Pope Francis, he's even trying to use simple words in order to reorient the present time gaze. So if we just are focused on given sectors, we miss the rest of reality, what is around. If we are too focused on certain given forms of existence, we are missing what is essential. So we are invited really to keep our eyes open all the time. We are invited not to close our eyes in front of certain realities. Our gaze must be an all-encompassing gaze. And now I want to conclude. I've been working 40 years as a journalist at the service of the church for 5 popes, and for 40 years I've always raised the same question. Do people understand the church or not? Is the church able to communicate or not? And I have always been trying to narrate, to show, to speak about the church, so the church be understood by people. And so, what is the meeting ground? Where the church and people, the world might understand each other, so that there might be recognize each other. And I think that Pope Francis has been trying to do that. And in the last few days, speaking to the journalist in Rome, he used the word hermeneutics. That is, how can we just make it possible for the press and other institutions to go beyond. And so what is trying to try to understand us by keeping into consideration what is our main interest. That is the good and love. And in order to conclude, yes, this is a reality. What can really be understood as the common heritage of all humankind. So the question now is, how is it possible to enter, to get into that reality by avoiding any conflicts and tensions? And now I would like to make a proposition for reflection. That is, maybe the solution is in the fact that we must all learn how to look in a different way. It is to modify, to change our gaze. Thanks a lot for your presentation. I know that you must leave also because it is almost midnight. So I would like to invite all the participants to ask questions now, even though the Q&A is foreseen for 5. But if you have some questions, so I think that so your speech has been very interesting. Even Professor Sali, well, just raised important questions. So my question is the following. Yes, you said we must we must go beyond. We must look beyond. We must just use a different perspective from the peripheries. So, but how can we do? How can just we abandon our Eurocentrical ethic? How can we get rid of that? It is not easy. I'm rather pessimistic because I never forget a very good definition of pessimism given by a British thinker. He said, those who are always well informed is a pessimistic. So information is extremely important because information enables us to be optimistic, because if you are well informed, you can understand reality. So pessimism is not being informed. Optimistic is being very well informed. So even the elderly, those who are rather elder, might change. But I think that the greatest gesture of generosity is to be just based on the new generations. On Obviously, the new generation are always the protagonists of history. So the elder persons should nonetheless give a last contribution. So the elder can really teach a new way of looking. So, okay, well, it's very good to know that even the elder have a mission today. So I have to say these two presentations are very interesting, rich. So the church's gaze, how this gaze has changed through time. So you have mentioned 4 popes. So that is even more delicate. If we consider the last popes, starting with John 23rd, well, I was very young. These popes, the last popes, have been different from one another. They have led different magisteriums. They have even created turning points. So even though maybe they had some flaws, these popes have been able to communicate something, and the lay people um, haven't always been able to understand. So the lay have mainly focused their gaze on the person of the Pope without considering the message. And maybe this has been a bit of a problem because all these popes, the last popes, have all of them given an important contribution to modern society. They have given some key interpretations of present day reality. Thanks, thanks a lot. I don't know if there are other questions. Professor Augustine Sali, can you remain for the questions after? Yes, at the end of the session.
Adesso non potevo entrare, scusami per questo.
Okay.
I have
Thank you.
I have a question for Agustin Sali. Because I mean, it's this global studies, you know, it's one of the programs in which we really try to study this kind of combination we heard about before, you know, the different looks and the different, and I think the structure is very very typical for the Jesuits, I say, because they want to help, you know. I see that many problems, as you said, you started with violence, you know, you started with a problem and then you developed a kind of program. So my question would be, in this, you know, because the whole program is a bit about the look of Christ, you know, this kind of threefold look, the Trinitarian look. Would you say that this program you build up, you know, you are responsible for all these professors, and you build it up there in Japan. Would you say that we have a kind of threefold Trinitarian look in this program? And how does it, you know, how is it expressed?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. It's not very easy to make reflections in that Trinitarian terms and so on in our university, which is very secular here. But at the same time, we use the term three-dimensional understanding of the reality. And that is exactly what we were trying, because the local is very important. We started with the area studies, which is focusing on the local, the experience of the people, issues, problems in the local experience. But it has developed, it is not only the problem of that particular locality in the global world. So we started extending our look into the global context, sharing our knowledge, at the same time extending the borders so that it becomes global. And therefore, it is local at one hand. At the same time, we look in a way wider, in a global perspective, using some of the traditional academic disciplines. We are using here the international relations, civil society areas, and so on. But we have anthropological approach, we have historical approach, various professors. In the department, we have all types of academic background professors here. So that is our strength, actually. It's not only one area.
So that means could we say that it's like, sorry, but it's like Romano Guardini with his polar opposition. You could say exactly. The truth is in between the local and the universal, or the global and the local. So in a certain sense, it must be like the whole and the fragment, as we heard.
Yes,
or the species and in Darwin 2 days ago, the species and the general. You know, you just look in between to see the truth.
I think that is going along with the same understanding. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sali. Yes, they asked me to remember not to talk too fast, to speak slowly, because otherwise it is a little bit difficult for our translator, whom I thank all for their precious work. So even in Italian, we must remember to speak a little bit slower. And prima di iniziare l'altra sessione che
so
vede...
Before starting a second session, I would like to give the floor to Professor Florin, who is here for a welcome address. And also, if I'm asking him, if he can just mention the work he's carrying out. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Yvonne, for this beautiful occasion of encounter. So the school I lead is entitled Educating to the Encounter, and this experience is really in tune with this conference. So in this, let's say, path to the encounter, we have met scholars. That is, it is a pontifical organization with which we cooperate with 2 projects. The first project is called Scholar Chairs, and scholars from 100 universities all over the world cooperate in this project. So these are professors, from different areas, different disciplines, but also different faiths. And so this organization is trying to follow on the instructions given by Pope Francis in order to translate his thoughts into concrete actions. And then there is another project that will end with the conference in Chile, and every time we have a conference in a different parts of the world, and the title is Living in the Universe. And then also this is a sort of academic experience, but there is then another project launched by Pope Francis during the pandemic 2 years ago on the occasion of the World Day for the Environment. And Pope asked these scholars that asked, so he asked us to create the University del Sentido. This is in Spanish. So this is the University of Feelings, we might say. So I have to say that we have tried to interpret the Pope's wish, but now we have already drafted a document for the creation of this university, and we gave this document to the Pope last spring. This document is also the fruit of a common work among scholars. So we worked with the professors from Harvard University, Pretoria University, London University, so different parts of the world, and UNESCO. And this document is also the result of the contribution of people belonging to different religions, different groups, and so on and so on. And now we are just trying to build up this university with some experimental work, and we are now starting a university cycle based on the involvement of students. When Pope Francis launched the Universidad del Sentido, also gave the instructions, the elements. So the three keywords he gave are listening, that is, the Universidad del Sentido must be able to listen to the suffering of the world, to understand the crisis of the world, but a suffering that is older than this pandemic. So this Universidad must be able to listen with the heart. Then the creativity, the second word, that is, this university must be able to adopt positions, to speak clearly. And then the third is a celebration as an experience of gratitude, religious and spiritual. So these three words then are founded on specific methods that are shown by the Pope. In fact, he always speaks about the heart, the mind, and the hand. So this is the method. So we must follow the wisdom of the heart, then the hand, the mind. Mind means that we can understand the problems, and we must carry out research work. And then hand means that we must use our hands in order to act concretely. So this project has been tested from the methodological standpoint with the first cycle, 5 steps. That is, first, we must talk to the students from all over the world. If, in fact, we want to organize workshops in all continents, And so there is a question, che te fa? Che te pasa? So this is the question that was mentioned by the Pope. Che te pasa means what are you feeling in this moment? And we want to ask the students to express their feelings. Then creation of a global classroom. So in this global classroom, these students must meet their teachers. Then third point, active citizenship. That is what we can do, what a form of commitments can be made. And then meeting with other scholars and teachers. And then so the various groups might meet along this network of universities, so exchanges. So this is in short this project launched by the Pope, because he understands the importance of an approach which is not only a formal approach, but this approach must also be based on popular knowledge, on the knowledge of the people, knowledge due to experience. So this is an attempt to give an answer to the present time crisis, and today's crisis is really serious. So maybe this is also a deeper crisis. This is a crisis for meaning. So thanks for speaking about the project. So now I would like to invite Professor Fiori to stay, because now we have a session of dialogues, debates. So we have two couples discussing two things. The first couple is Mr. Caltagirone and Sidoni, talking about Romano Guardini and the encounter of disciplines. You know that Caltagirone, so we often work together. So he has tackled the theme of transdisciplinary approach. He's an expert of Romano Guardini. He wrote many works on this order, and he focused on this theme, and now he is working on the some epistemological and ethical questions. Then Elena Sidoni, she is taking her doctorate at the Gregorian Pontifical University, and she graduated in modern literature and specialized in art. And so also she studied at Roma Free University, and then she got the postgraduate certificate for the enhancement of our cultural heritage. So you have 15 minutes each. And now I'm asking, well, now just to happy to just show the slides. So thanks a lot for the invitation. So Professor Cinque, if you can just show the slide.
Questo intervento, ecco, nasce a due voci.
So now I have to say that my presentation is about the encounter of some virtual gaze. Very shortly, I want to say that for Guardini, the encounter of disciplines is fundamental because he just finds that in his personal experience in his life, because obviously his work encompasses theology, philosophy, anthropology, and so his life is a concrete expression of the encounter between these disciplines. So he is not a systematic philosopher. He didn't start from a closed system, but he just made reflections on the human experience. And that, so he went beyond any ideologies. Obviously, he lived, even though he lived in a period marked by ideologies. So if we consider considering the philosophy and the existential perspective, applying the phenomenological method according to which knowledge is the living relationship of a living subject towards a concrete object, and the phenomenon, the clarification of an essence, Romano Guardini elaborates a metaphysics of polar being that finds its explanation in the system of opposites. So the polar opposition is rather the system of opposites and expresses Guardini's vision of existence as polarity, as a method that approaches and welcomes reality in its complexity and in its tension of oppositions that are not to be eliminated nor manipulated. So he developed these polar opposition, and this is a way to see things as a totality in itself and as a part of a totality. So Guardini just had a vision of the world that enables him to see the relations in the world in a very structured way. So in the light of this global gaze, we can understand how the encounter of disciplines can take place in a present context of specialization. And so we can help to just this specialization is not to be considered as a limited domain, but he also consider so his love for a life just gives us a. So this has been not only a way of seeing from the external, but it has been an encounter with life that was at the basis of his thought and his life. That is why he just was open to the listening to the neighbor, to the other, because it is in giving and receiving that we can determine an interior dialogue with other interlocutors. In fact, Guardini just studied different figures of our culture. And these were not only philosophers, but also poets, different authors that gave him the opportunity to determine this encounter between disciplines, even if
Scusi, Calogero. Puoi mettere schermo intero perché mi dicono che alcuni non riescono a seguire. Grazie, grazie mille.
Va bene, ecco, si vede bene, vedo bene anch'io per le altre cose.
Sì, adesso si vede meglio.
Sì, ecco. Da questo punto di vista, dicevo, Gualdini si pone di fronte ad autori.
So from this point of view, he confronts others, problems, themes, first of all, to understand them, to question them, to feed the throb of truth that they convey, and there's also to understand their message that through dialogue can enable us to understand the meaning of all times. Some authors' problems, themes are taken into consideration because of their specific religious dimension, and this religious dimension becomes, let's say, a form of interpretation of the world. So they become significant for an encounter, a comparison, and for a problematization that always responds to the questions of the concrete living being. This explains why, for Romano Guardini, the theme of the encounter, personal, social, political, cultural, disciplinary, so we can find all these in his work. So all these encounters can decline in a very special way the relations that the human being has with himself, with others, and with the things of the world. Obviously, there is an amazement in this encounter. This amazement of the encounter testifies to his works, because I am approaching the others, and the others can be open to me. And from this encounter, there is a gaze, so knowledge takes concrete form as an encounter of gazes, of seeing, from which emerges not the abstract judgment, but the form which expresses what man sees, the act of seeing. And here there is a synoptic interpretation of the reality. So we can see a part in the totality and the totality in any single part. So this just means that the encounter is not just a way of meeting, it's not a proximity, but the encounter means that we are looking together in a reciprocal relation, I and you, that just is implemented at different steps. So there are different degrees of this capacity of understanding reality. So in the encounter, is not out a sort of confrontational frontality. It is not an at that is a confusing by losing the specificity of I and you. The encounter is being in between. Encounter means that we are in between. There is a reciprocity, and any person can be so defined in this reciprocal encounter. So we were speaking about the Trinity. So being between means that we are one into the other by turning around, revolving around, but without losing one's own characteristics. So in the encounter with the other men, every person can understand the power of the other person, but also his own position, his own characteristics. So it is not an objectification, but this happens when a person he tries to establish a relation, but with the aim of understanding the other's richness, but also one's own richness. So this is a relationship between subjects. So there is an intersubjectivity activity, so each subject can be recognized to the full. They can be recognized, and in this way we can even give deeper and richer love, friendship, and authentic feelings. And so in this sense, frontality means that we can define a relationship with a person that is a trustable person. So this dimension of proximity leads to an authentic encounter. So the other is met in full according to the authenticity of his person. And this totality makes me understand what the other is. And I can understand the other, but I can also understand myself. And this implies the overcoming of unilaterality in the encounter. The tension between the different poles of reality is realized, and the disciplines represent an interpretation of that. So disciplines are a way of explaining the reality around us, and through these disciplines we can also express our specificity, and we can determine the existence of one within the other. The fact that a person is in front of the other, and so there are three basic theory elements, and each element can determine the Weltanschauung. In the light of this consideration, we can understand how Guardini can understand the richness of any discipline which expresses the need to communicate and integrate the different fields of knowledge. In the light of these considerations, the encounter of disciplines conjugates a movement, and this movement is very well determined. That is, it is a movement from towards someone. That is a movement according to which each discipline can be interpreted within the other. So it is a giving and receiving in a dynamic of a reciprocating reciprocity of the different disciplines. And this expresses the need to communicate and integrate the different fields of knowledge in order to have a unitarian comprehensive vision of problems. So this is a movement which is transdisciplinary, because within each discipline there is this reciprocity, and we can understand the various degrees of reality. So there are three different orders. So we can use the eye of the mind, a physical eye, to the concrete eye. So here we have a perception and knowledge, and by overcoming all the disciplines we can have unity in the diversity, and we can also contribute to have a gaze on the whole in a concrete vision which refers to the same subjects who know, develop, and share the knowledge they have acquired, and they also share it by making a reciprocal gift, which in this way becomes the experience of thinking together. Guardini could do that because he could really carry out this encounter of disciplines. Since today we do not have the totality of knowledge, how can we do that? Through the reciprocal encounter that we all try to implement in the dialogue of what we are. And this is an attempt that I and Mrs. Elena have tried to do in this reciprocity of gazes And each one of us has tried to give and receive one's own specificity. So now I'm going to give her the floor. Thanks. So all the exchanges with the Professor Caltagirone have led to questions. So now I would like to speak about my personal studies with the interdisciplinary and what is Guardini's interdisciplinarity and what is the difference between my interdisciplinary and how can we find a method. So I found the answers in the chapter The Fullness of Justice in Guardini's work, The Lord. This is an analysis of the Sermon on the Mount, or rather of that series of doctrines and admonitions that announces the ethics of Jesus, all that is new about man's relations with his neighbor, with the world, and with God. This is not a pure moral doctrine, but it is a full form of existence. This awareness is affirmed and expressed in the Beatitudes, admirable and disquieting expressions proclaim blessed those who seem to be unhappy. So what is the relation between all these with the transdisciplinarity? What are the disciplines and their encounters, if not man's relation with himself, with his neighbor, and with the world, and with God? Then in this way, new values enter the world from above to overturn, but above all, to complete. The order then focuses on the imperatives concerning the relations with one's neighbor. So these are also relations of justice and charity. First, do not swear, that is, do not be convinced of possessing the absolute truth that belongs to God. Only by making room for the truth of the other, we can encounter different disciplines. Second, to be reconciled with the one's brother. One can kill with thought and speech by following the path traced by evil. Only with calm and acceptance we can have a dialogue between disciplines. Third, do not resist evil. That is, do not stop at the justice that involves punishment or retribution, eye for an eye. And once again, we must renounce ourselves and embrace justice, creative freedom, and that brings into play the power of love. Fourth, loving one's enemies, that is to see who the other is by judging according to the art. The other also seen as culture and thought. Fifth, to respect the person of different sex and their purity, that is the orientation of the heart. God's will is the perfecting of man, who is a whole in which there are no compartments. And again, by giving free rein to thought, you have already laid the seeds for action. It is man who must be good, working in virtue of the love that does not measure, but gives and creates the new existence that comes from love. This exceeds, goes beyond human strength. Ethics is no longer enough. It is necessary to make the leap into faith, dedication to a request that must be at the same time fullness of grace. Thanks for your attention. Would like to thank Professor Dana, the organizers, for the opportunity you gave me, and also thanks to all the speakers and participants, and obviously would like to thank Professor Caltagirone that shared this thing with me. Okay, I have to say that this meeting was very fruitful So now, then we'll have some questions at the end. And now we have another couple, Professor Rossa and Maria Cinque. So the pedagogy of harmony and the global village. So Professor Carina Rossa has a doctorate on social sciences. She's a professor at the Sofia Institute, and she also works at the high school. And she cooperates with the LUMSA and also with the Catholic Commission of the Holy See, and she's also part of the Promoting and Steering Committee for Global Education, and she also teaches pedagogy. So I'm now showing the slides. So there are 5 parts, 2 parts. Now I'm going to speak about the harmony of pedagogy.
Non ancora.
Non si vede. No.
Schermo intero, ecco, adesso dovreste vedere. Eccoci.
Sì. E di ingrandire.
Sì, sì, arrivo subito, scusate un attimo. Ok, lo metto in presentazione. Innanzitutto volevo fare una breve
So
riflessione.
first of all, I would like to speak about the word harmony that is rather frequent in education, particularly in reference to theories, methods, and practices. Usually the meaning to which the term harmony refers to an educational approach aimed at the growth of a person, a growth that depends on the gaze with which one educates, a gaze that leads to the development of the mind, hand, and heart. And Pope Francis says that also another pedagogist, Pestalozzi, had already mentioned mind, hand, and heart. Towards the end of the 18th century, while in Paris people were fighting for freedom, fraternity, and equality, in Zurich there were those who fought against illiteracy in favor of education, and they were speaking about the integral education. In fact, at the turn of the century, Pestalozzi was concerned with the education of boys and girls and developed his own system based on the idea of harmonious and gradual development of the art. So he spoke about affectivity, creativity, and then he also spoke about thought and intelligence and of the hand, that is art and motor skills. So these were the first intuitions of what would later be called integral education. Pope Francis returned on these 3 words, mind, heart, and hand, but he clarified harmoniously, warning how important it is to think what you feel and what you do, to feel well what you think and what you do, and to I can't hear, and to do well what you think. Francis has the merit of having taken up a line of wisdom that has accompanied all the education and pedagogy of the recent centuries, and he said that it must be careful. You have to put everything together harmoniously. The term harmony in music refers to the vertical relationship between simultaneous pitches in a musical texture. So you have a texture with chords. So these are horizontal relations that have a specific structure. Polyphony is a related, different concept. Polyphony refers to a texture containing a number of independent melodic lines, a texture that does not rely on a series of block chords, but it has an harmonic structure. Although independent to a certain extent, the lines are bound together by the counterpoint. In the 15th century, within the written musical tradition, the counterpoint had become the point of reference for all compositions. If those who I studied the composition, musical composition, and also studied the counterpoint. And I must say this is still the basic for music composition. So in the history of music at the 9th century to the 16th century, was based on development, complication, and rationalization of the counterpoint polyphony. The complication became so difficult, so complex, because then there were 2, 3, 6 voices. Since it was too complex, they felt the need for a rationalization and simplification of these musical accords. So there was the idea to make the different voices meet in specific structures. So the concept of harmony was developed, and this concept became a metaphor for the concept of encounter, that is the encounter of voices, but also the encounter of moral and so on. This is a way of sharing of experiences. So in the encounter, the person can express himself in all his fragility and vulnerability. In the simple encounter of one man with another, the essential and the absolute is played out. In the epiphany of one's face, I discover that the world is mine to the extent I can share it with the other, and the absolute is played out in proximity within the reach of my gaze. So let's go back to Pope Francis. As I said at the beginning of this meeting, when the experience of the encounter is possible only by moving, by going towards the periphery. Pope Francis says, when I speak of the periphery, I speak of borders. Normally we move in spaces that we control in one way or the other. This is the center. To the extent that we leave the center, we can discover more things. When we look at the center of these new things that we have discovered, the peripheries, and we see different realities. One thing is looking at a reality, another thing is looking at the same reality from a different perspective. For instance, Europe seen from Madrid in 16th century was one thing, but then when Magellan arrived at the end of the American continent, he looked at Europe from a different viewpoint and he understood lots of things. So reality is better understood from the periphery, because there you can see the existential periphery. You can have a very structured thought, but when you confront someone who doesn't think like you must find new reasons, and there is a debate, and the periphery of the other person's thought enriches you. To do that, to open up to the other, to go to the peripheries, to widen our gaze, it takes courage. Pope Francis, in his message for the Global Compact on Education, stresses it in 3 different ways. That is, it takes the courage to put the person at the center, the courage to invest the best energies, the courage to form people who are willing to serve society. Pope Francis reminded us that every change, such as the epochal one we are experiencing, requires a process of education capable of creating a network of human relationships. There is a need for educational vision that encompasses all personal positions. Young people must develop their personalities. Education is not limited to classrooms and universities. It is secured by strengthening the primary right of the family to educate, the right of the church and the social communities to support and assist the families in the education of their children. Pope Francis calls for the construction of a broad educational alliance, and he invites all actors in society to unite in building up a global village for education. The proposal calls for the creation of an education alliance based on different educational options by building networks of cooperation and support. An IEIS school, this is a project. So we have collected different experiences, initiatives in the different parts of the world. And these practices just witness this pedagogy of the gaze. This is something that already exists in some parts of the world. And the way of interpreting these good practices that I'm showing you, obviously, then in the question time, we can speak about these examples, leads to some concepts that we hope might lead to new guidelines. So we want that from these initiatives, we might find new methods, new narrations in the educational field. So these encounter, these service to society is a proposal that is transversal to all concepts. And Carina Rossi is going to talk about this, and we can find different models that go from local to global. And then within this research, we are going to develop just a project on the basis of 7 objectives mentioned by the Pope. There are 5 research fields that can be shared. And that in order to find research lines, educational guidelines. And now I give the floor to Mrs. Carina Rossa. Is going to speak about service learning and triple vision. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to speak about a pedagogical proposal of service learning and the triple vision, always in the light of this harmony. And I can say that these are just some intuitions that we are so we speak of service learning when in the implementation of a project, the pedagogical intention and the service intention are present. Generally, in our educational institutions, these two intentions run parallel, and by definition, they never touch, or maybe these are two different propositions polarizing certain aspects, such as theory versus practice, reflection versus experience, study versus life. The strength of this proposal lies in the hyphen that unites two realities. And as Puig and Rovigo say, service learning is an innovative proposal, even though it is based on well-known elements such as service, volunteering, active citizenship on the one hand, and the learning of so we can find a link between service and learning in a single activity that is coordinated and coherent. The integration of service with learning gives rise to a third element, a new pedagogical proposal that is service learning, which transforms both components, which gives a value and meaning to each of them and creates new educational qualities. There is a deep link between these two poles, which improves each one, produces a new and different result, which couldn't otherwise be achieved. One of the great strengths of service learning lies precisely in overcoming
Dicevo che uno dei grandi punti di forza sta proprio nel superare le
in overcoming the old antinomies between scientific and ethical education, between learning content and competence development, between academic excellence and educational inclusion. Overcoming these antinomies has given rise to a mutual beneficial relationship through which the systematic learning enriches the quality of social work and service, and then the service has an impact on training and stimulates knowledge production. This newly generated knowledge and the development of new competencies can be considered as one of the emerging elements of this polar tension. As Professor Cinque said, in the proposal made by Pope Francis for a global educational alliance, he spoke about courage. Have the courage to form people willing to put themselves at the service of the community. With these words, the Pope exhorted the schools and universities to engage in projects of sharing and service to the least, as indicated in the instrumentum laboris of this educational alliance. Today, young people are calling the whole society to rediscover this spirit of service, without which every small community is subject to the risk of extinction. The term service refers to any activity that is useful and pleasing to the other, done together through the sharing of mutual gifts. We have identified some characteristics that describe what is meant by service. Service is something concrete. We spoke about that. It must be useful and real. It makes the transformation of reality possible. It moves away from desire or simple planning. It is a practical experience which has a decision-making and organizational moment, and which presupposes a commitment. Service responds to a real and authentic need. Service is always a demanding experience. When one serves a community, it is a difficult task. Doing something for others implies doing it with responsibility, because you can benefit but also create some damage if you are not skilled. In fact, to work in a community, you need to know more. You know to know the subject as well as how to relate to others. You must overcome mistrust, prejudices, difficult situations. So there are risks of failure and other difficult situations. Then service always generates some kind of reciprocity structure. In fact, those who do the service also receive some benefits. There is a relationship of mutual promotion. Service enables the production of goods characterized by the value of gratuitousness. Gratuitousness generates reciprocity in the logic of a pro-social behavior. Within this perspective, the category generativity is inserted. This is a concept from sociology and anthropology and can be adopted to assess the reciprocity. Generativity is a new way of thinking and acting, personal and collective. It is referred to a socially oriented, responsible society. It can have an impact on the forms of producing, innovating, inhabiting, caring, injecting new life.
La generatività sociale comprende diverse fasi che vanno dal partorire, cioè la fase
Social generativity comprises several phases: giving birth, caring, letting go. When it develops in all its depth and breadth, overcoming the pitfalls hidden in each of its three movements, the generative action leads to positive results. It creates a social dynamic, social relation based on gratitude and creativity. The social generativity also implies a movement through time, so it goes through time, it expands through space, and encompasses the others. So we have intersubjectivity. Then there is another approach, which is the ecosystemic approach. According to this approach, used in different disciplines, learning takes place within a complex network made up of people and teams dynamically interacting with each other. So this is generative of new knowledge. Now, some research, a way to uniting service learning by just considering some transcendental elements: truth, goodness, and beauty. Service learning offers an unquestionable horizon of meaning to students. who discover through service that study is useful and that what they learn can be a gift for others. Those who have a good experience discover the purpose for which to study, which goes beyond the search for truth, but also that of the good, the search for common good, self-transcendence, accompanied by a large dose of gratuitousness. These two aims, truth and goodness, are nurtured one another and also have a three-dimensional element that includes beauty, and education of the gaze could lead to the emergence of elements of beauty which are not apparent. So this education might make us see what beauty is. So these are not evident today. However, in our opinion, we find that behind this experience of service learning, there are also some other values that are opposite to beauty, that is ugliness. Ugliness means all those realities that generate contempt, humiliation, shame, limitation. That is all the characteristics that are present in the marginalized people and that are also part of that social reality that the project on the contrary wants to address. So ugliness just considers the wounds of the marginalized. Students must touch and see, as Pope Francis says, with a merciful heart and also with reason, in order to investigate the structural causes which provoke them and try to transform them on the basis of what has been learned in the classroom. But perhaps the most important learning that we can offer our students in the development of service learning, which also lead us to proximity, to meet the others, and also in a very intuitive way, we might conclude by saying that beauty is constituted in the promise of service learning, and the way is the way of mercy. If we can't educate our gaze.
Grazie, anche in questo caso poi se avete domande siamo a vostra disposizione dopo perché abbiamo l'ultima.
So we have the last couple made up by Cucrasi Russo, Irene Cucrasi. She studies humanism. She has a doctorate at LUMSA and the Pontifical University in Chile, and also she also teaches studies soft skills. She is also member of the Service Learning Association. Claudia Russo has a doctorate in social theology at LUMSA University in Rome. She's interested in personal values, relationship, and starting in 2020, she has been collaborating with the ACE School, and so she just carries out research projects at LUMSA. So you are going to show your slides yourselves.
Dovrei essere abilitata. Ok, ora sì.
All right, thank you.
Eccomi, mi sentite? Sì, perfetto. Allora, buonasera a
So good evening, everyone. Today, with Mrs. Kurkasi, I would like to just follow a bit in the line of the previous speakers. So the title is Educate and Exercise the Space of Knowledge. So I would like to start with a definition of pro-social. According to the Treccani dictionary, pro-social means what is in favor of society, promoting solidarity. So pro-social means that there is a series of values, behaviors that are implemented in order to do good for a person or a group of people without a personal interest. I imagine pro-sociality as a tree whose fertile soil is made up of pro-social values, and then the trunk is competencies, and then leaves and the flowers are pro-social behaviors. So by pro-social values, we mean some objectives that go beyond situations, they go beyond specific situations, and that represent a guide for behavior. According to Schwartz, we have some value, and these include benevolence, such as care for relations, loyalty, support, and then we have another category that is universalism, that such as justice and ecology. The pro-social competencies are some soft skills that are interpersonal. Here we find, for instance, active listening, resourcefulness, pro-social leadership, and within this circle of soft skills, we have self-efficiency. That is the perception of each individual of their skills. That is, each person understands he has or doesn't have these skills. Then we have pro-social behaviors that are giving, cooperating, helping, and being with others. And here again, we have the role of all self-efficiency. Self-efficiency means that I am able to act in a pro-social manner. Why is it important to be pro-social? This is a bit a question I raised. In fact, the scientific research shows that being pro-social is something good not only for the recipients, but also for the actors. So starting from childhood and during adolescence or adulthood, these are important behaviors. Being a pro-social means that you are generative. And now I would like to refer to what my colleague was saying. So this is the human capacity and goes beyond any biological attitude. It is an openness. It is a capacity that enables us to be connected to one another by contributing to a positive social change. Educating to pro-sociality means educating and also conceiving an education based on skills aimed at increasing personal well-being, but also the social well-being. And this goes beyond any hedonical interpretation, but well-being intended and meant as a community. So educating to pro-sociality takes on a even greater importance if we think of university, because university students will be future professionals and leaders, and with their skills, the skills that they acquire during university might give their contribution to society. Then educating to pro-sociality during COVID times means to add new meaning to this social proximity at a time in which distancing is necessary for health safety. So these are the objectives of this education. First of all, the promotion of emotional intelligence, self-regulating mechanisms. So these education should not be only based on hard skills, but basically on soft skills. Then the main aim is the common good. So a syllabus favoring pro-sociality must be centered of each individual. Students must be involved. There is care for others at different levels, and even the milieu, the environment should be taken into account. Even though there are different measures conceived in order to increase pro-sociality for secondary school students, and here we have only two models, the model of pro-social action and the other. So, well, so even though there are so high students, we must consider university students. So if there are many projects for high school students, there are just a few projects for university students, which on the contrary are absolutely necessary. It is in this context that we might consider service learning. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague.
Sì, Claudia, mi scuso, in realtà ho la febbre anche
So I
abbastanza
apologize, but I've got a temperature in this moment, so I hope that I'll be able to make my presentation. As Claudia Russo was saying, service learning, as Mrs. Carina Rossi said, is founded on social skills, because starting from primary school to university, students should be able to interpret their reality and try to find ways to have an impact on society thanks to skills that are being learned and acquired. While I'm thinking about young people that will become professionals, so they must acquire in this period, this moment, specific skills. So there are also some key elements, and so we spoke about the sociality, that is the active involvement of students, and so this project should be carried out with a community. So there is basically a horizontal dimension. So reciprocity means that I give and I receive, because if a student must interact with his reality, his community, when the result of this action should go back to the university context, because on the basis of changes, new research and new projects can be conceived. So these projects come from university, but then are deeply connected to society. This is a service learning. Maybe the hyphen shown by Professor Rosa means that there is a reflection, the capacity of connecting experiences with the cognitive action. There are different possibilities for service learning. So there is a direct service learning to the community. So actions aimed at people can be also indirect. That is for the whole society. And then you might also have advocacy service learning that is considering some general themes or research-based. That is in order to have an impact on society. So during the pandemic, service learning was particularly meaningful. So the challenge was really to preserve these experience-based activity, even though distancing and other measures were imposed. So there was a different relation between service learning and technology and needs, because during the pandemic, needs arose with Professor Chipe and another professor from Slovakia University. We carried out European research in order to see how universities were responding to these new social needs. So we were just analyzing these social needs based on the subject being studied by students. So we chose 43 projects, and you see here that Spain is there in a pole position, we could say. So 26 universities were involved in the project. So obviously these were virtual projects, and 27 disciplines were considered, 7 interdisciplinary fields, and almost 2,000 students. Most projects were psychological projects, but we really tried to go beyond any specific discipline in order to tackle problems from different standpoints. While some projects just included a few students, and others, even many of them, hundreds of students. So here you have the 4 main fields, social area, such as cyberbullying, sports and young people. And the cyberbullying just became a sort of emergency during the pandemic. Then another field was information, for instance, religious faith that couldn't be lived during the pandemic, and then public health, first aid, then a psychological field. There is a support to people, emotional support, problems, sleep disorders, anxiety disorders, so psychological support. And then the most important field was the area of vulnerable groups. So elderly people, persons with disabilities, children, families that were in need. So all these objectives were also included in the Agenda 2030. So this is a project carried out by Luxor University. This is a group of psychology students that tackled the problem. So they just carried out some students in their academic field in order to speak about disorders with children. So they tried also to give a contribution to solve a serious problem, and did that with an association from Northern.
So another important project was in the field of information. This is Portugal, which is Empower to Save. These are basically students of a nursery of nursing, and through research, probably one of the highest causes of death is linked to heart diseases. And so many of the students turned into professors. So they taught educated higher school and secondary school students, because in so doing, they were able to better consolidate and their skills in the nursing field, while at the same time helping others to undertake prevention. This is an additional project, which is more linked to, from a psychological point of view. These are students in the Faculty of Psychology, and which basically opened up mental health, supported by their teaching staff. They opened up new possibilities of providing different forms of psychological support, either for students or for other members of the university. And then this is another group, always vulnerable groups in Spain, which has been organized by those they developed service learning, advocacy service learning, and collaborating with an NGO in favor of refugees and female refugee women in Spain, helping them to be reintegrated, or rather integrated into the society. So they provided a handbook which was based on a number of success stories of refugee women who basically started their own small activities and businesses. This is an overall picture of all of the projects at European level. This is at least reflects the period of the pandemics, and which has in fact concerned a number of the sustainable development goals, in particular number 4, quality education, but also health, well-being, and also reducing inequalities. Of course, also technology played an important role, and certainly an innovative role, because out of the many projects, only 2 were able to use an advanced technology, maybe through apps, through video games. There is a project, this one is a Belgian one. These are students of engineering of ITC who basically developed different games for young children in order to teach them how to learn how to use, for example, a computer, so how to use a mouse, how to click, and they have done that with this a small app for disabled children. And I must say that technology has been used more as a tool, as a means through which the activity would be carried out, eliminating differences, and without necessarily requiring high skills in terms of technology. And also what the professor was saying, in the end, this service learning, this virtual dimension, which is named as e-service learning, E stands for electronic, basically preserves the role of students as active protagonists. And so it invites teachers and professors, how can they use these new devices in order to have a better impact of reality. And these experiences promote the cognitive, affective, and experiential dimension. So the heart, the mind rather, the heart, and the hand, the experiential one. And so basically involving on an all-round basis students involved. Claudia maybe wanted to underline the fact that those initiatives which are oriented to younger children underline the importance of having a general purpose e-learning in classrooms and also outside classrooms, because we are speaking about younger age children. And so I wanted to underline the fact that service learning does bridge this gap, because when we have a general purpose service learning, it fits perfectly well with this kind of tool, because on the one hand, students learn in the classroom, so there is motivation, their needs, and also the troubleshooting. But then once they leave the classroom, which can be either, leaving physically the classroom or even in a virtual way, they can test and experiment what they have learned in the classroom. So this allows them really to implement these new skills or new knowledge they have learned. And inevitably, this should, first of all, improve pro-sociality, but also their effectiveness, the fact that they feel empowered because they feel that they can actually produce a positive change in the world. I want to thank all of you. I would like to thank Claudia. Thank you for your sharing. Thank you very much. We are running only with a 6 minutes delay. I would say that thank you very much for having basically been able to stick to the proper schedule. So maybe now we can have some time for a Q&A. I would suggest that if there's a question which is maybe direct addressed, we will basically raise your hand, and there's someone who would like to ask a question. So otherwise it will be someone who has to break the ice. Then I will start. At the very beginning, first of all, thank you for these very interesting contribution. Which are very closely interlinked. At the very beginning, we had this beautiful contribution on Romano Guardini, that is, to what extent is one within the other? One is present in the other. It seems to be very straightforward because we share a lot of similarities, but I would like to ask two questions. First of all, we have understood that there are different levels. So this different leveling, different grades. I would like to ask, why do we speak about different levels? Because Guardini doesn't speak so much about levels, but rather it is, let's say, looking at a whole, it's seeing the whole. So it's an integral look. So how can we actually consider this ability of seeing everything, not only the negative or the positive thing, but so my question is precisely how can we educate the ability to see all this as an integral whole? Would you address the question? I assume it is directed to me. I believe we can use when we use maybe the word level, it's better than the word in Italian grade. There's a difference between what Jacques Maritain and Guardini wrote. So this overall seeing the world is global. It is also, which is at the same time synthetic and analytical, because should it be only synthetic, we would sees only some smaller part. But if it's analytical, the same would occur. So in our structure, in our ability of seeing, we basically have different levels. It's an empirical level, because the empirical level allows us to see the phenomenon as it is. Now, the empirical level is determined by a level of transcendence and of an opening towards the transcendence. So it allows me to have an overall look at the entire reality. And this is done also through the philosophical knowledge, because the philosophical knowledge allows for this kind of outlook and seeing, because through this process of illumination and enlightenment, just like Saint Augustine and also Romano Guardini in mentioning that, they allow me to see with this different form of light the my look at the world, my seeing the world. But this can be done only from an anthropological point of view, because this is what Guardini mentioned. So in structuring these different levels of seeing and of look in this, I would call it almost like a dance, like a ballet. So that would allow us to see the reality as we see it. But if we are instead only in a circle, we will be one of the many individual points on this circle. So we are unable to have an overall. So we have to centralize and decentralize. So we have to continuously alternate the two. And so maybe have this different way of looking at the reality that Pope Francis defines as polyedric, multifaceted. So this is offered by precisely a multifaceted. So maybe if we don't want to use the word gray, we can use level, but we can use also otherwise an eccentric look or seeing. So it's an ongoing movement. You first enter and then you move out. So you enter and you leave, you enter and you leave. And this allows us to have this multifaceted seeing. And this, of course, in our multicultural setting, we are all one look of the polyedric shape. And so all together, so it's more of the seeing a unity. So if you say each one is one part of this polyedric view, then we are all together, we are a little part, and all together it's a multiple unity. It's a unity which is at the beginning there is a difference between the various ways. Out, et. So one is inclusive and the other is exclusive. So this does allow us to have a unitarian vision of reality, but without and simplicity. So unity, which is not confused, and then instead a different viewing, which is not separated. These are also the four verbs in Christology. In the Christology, we have unity of natures, of human nature, which are united but not confused. They are distinct and separated. So in a unit which is well distinguished. So this allows us to see the various facets of our polyedric reality. But this can be seen only in the different ways of looking. And this is our true challenge. because we no longer have this classical view. So it is through this possibility of a dialogue between different disciplines. So it's a constant movement, giving and receiving, giving and receiving. Thank you. There are two more questions. So the floor to Oreste. Good. Another scholar of Guardini. Hi, Calogero. My question that I would like to address to you, I have two questions and the other is for other speakers. Well, you spoke about Gestalt, so the psychology of forms, and which basically touches upon the psychological dimension. In your opinion, this idea of Gestalt, how can it help us? How can it help us in this analysis of the personal encounter? So which is the contribution that the psychological approach can grant us in this Weltanschauung, which is the whole? Those who instead spoke about service learning, the other two speakers, and the pro-social activities and approaches, they all spoke about the person-centered, but this is not only linked to the pandemics, it's part of a society which is global and where somehow the identity needs to be loosened in order to become part of a more collaborative one. So, but we noticed that in this, during this pandemic, during the COVID pandemic, we understood that the social needs increased, while instead, at the same time, there has been a true collapse. People have became self-centered. So I wanted to understand, on the basis of what you have done, on the basis of all the material that you have basically studied and analyzed, to what extent the pro-social can contribute in promoting this pro-social approach, and to what extent, what are the boundaries, and based on your personal experience? Thank you. So Gestalt, I didn't use it in the field of the psychology of forms, but how Balthasar uses that, who has been a great friend and a scholar of Guardini. It's the evidence of form which I perceive. So the idea of aesthetics. And what does this allow us to say? To say that we perceive this form as a global shape which characterizes our reality, but which through my encounter with this given reality, it becomes a way of shaping the reality, which means shaping human being and this reality of a human being, which is self-appropriation on the one hand, but also at the same time, the ability of trying to encounter the other. So this is the Gestalt. Now, in the field of the psychology of shapes, this can produce, has some implications, because it allows to understand the reality as global, which is, I must say, what is defined a figural reality. Some people don't like this word, figural, because it determines the elements where each of us is called to contribute in order to fill these gaps through this information. Information is providing a shape, so shaping this living being, which is a multifaceted, pluridimensional. social, religious, which implies growth, self-belonging, path. In this polarity between conscience and good relations, good in other people. Thank you very much. I would start maybe by answering to this question. Yes, exactly, precisely the experiments that we have done as Mrs. Russo. Precisely during this period of the pandemics, when we had to be in this lockdown, where we were obliged to basically do without all social contact, it led to pro-sociality. That is, the service learning is also the social reality was on digital formats and support, because you could not go out and meet people. So there was no way of doing that. So we have started to study. There is, of course, a scientific evidence. There are scientific studies which existed before the pandemics, and this was due to the e-learning from some universities, telematic universities, were interested because they wanted to provide greater possibilities of formation. For example, if you had to develop the website of NGO. So we started to study that and to consider different possibilities. And the students, I must say, have multiplied these possibilities because they're extremely creative. And now this particularly, when maybe during the classroom they had their videos let's say off or closed, they would open them up during these experiences. And we haven't been the first ones, because I would say that even at the European Observatory, the European Center, we understood that many of these activities had been resumed, but they not only resumed, but they had multiplied the supply of formative and learning possibilities. And of course, now we have started again a few classes in presence. But I would like to give also the floor to Claudia and Irene, who maybe can talk about this project. Now we have a second edition of this project, which is called the Friends, together with one of these, let's say, NGOs. So this is an experience of some of these children who are minors, and not only minors, teenagers who have committed some crimes. And so they go through this kind of experience and this kind of self-learning and self-experience. And I must say that our students and other students have been in contact during the project, but now also at the end of this project. So it's also developed new relationships. Technology can be extremely useful because they had provided some computers to these young ones in order for them to be able to contact and be in contact with our students. But I would say this is a tool to develop new activities. And I might say that this allowed us as well to imagine for the future additional possibilities, because I would say that even the students are different. Not all the students necessarily want to do all of the activities. You could say maybe you want to develop this website, and this is to the benefit of others. So, of course, to some extent, one starts to develop this kind of pro-social approach, as Claudia was saying, because it is based on certain values. So we believe that so maybe Claudia wanted to add something. Yes, allow me to say something. That is, if on the one hand, it is true that in this period, or a number of, unfortunately, reasons, we are isolated from a social, and not only social, sorry, a physical point of view, but we are born as social beings. So we have a strong need of social relationships, while during this period, we are obliged to be at home behind our screens, so we cannot enjoy our social life as we have always done before the pandemic. So when we provide new insight and new opportunities to be together and to meet, then nature is, how can I say, nature takes this opportunity and develops additional. We have to sort of encourage, and it's not, of course, the same thing as meeting in person, but of course, at the same time, in absence of an alternative, I would say that technology was part of our lives even before the pandemic. So for us as students, as scholars, we try to understand how to better use and better exploit technology. So going back to his question, it was a very interesting question. So how can a pro-social develop and promote and enhance the social relationships? I would say yes, because it allows for a deeper collaboration. I must say that we do not have sufficient scientific evidence, but we say it's encouraging. The floor to the Virginia Theological Seminary. You would like to ask a question? Please take the floor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for your presentations today. Yesterday, we talked about beholding, we talked about the object looking at us, and in relationship to the one who is the recipient, the question is, have you looked at or how do you see it? How do you see service learning from the point of view of the one who is the recipient? How does the recipient see the actor? And how have you included that into your thinking? If you have, to say it again, is how do you see service learning from the recipient's gaze? And how would you address that? Maybe Claudia or Irene would like to answer that.
Maybe I just start and then I leave the floor to them. And one important issue that we also consider is how to measure the impact, the social impact of service learning, which is sometimes maybe easier when you have direct service learning, because you know the target and you can use different tools to measure this impact. But if you do online service learning, the target is wider, different, is online, maybe sometimes. So how do you measure? Is, for example, the social indicators, how many contacts, how many something good? We don't know. For example, some of our students did a sensibilization campaign on the state of the schools in Italy. In Italy, some schools have not a good structure, so to say. And they asked a very important influencer to collaborate. So they collaborated with a very important influencer and they reached 1 million likes, which is something that a university professor wouldn't ever reach. So is this an indicator or not? I don't know if likes, like in social media, is an indicator of social impact. So we are still thinking of this wider community. But nevertheless, for direct service learning, for other forms of service learning, there are tools to measure the impact, and we are trying to measure this impact, which is not easy as well. I leave the floor to Claudia and to Irene. And you can speak Italian and they will translate if you want.
Posso dire qualcosa io anche?
Can I say something as well?
Sì.
So the question is seeing, no? Our way that we have on the other side. So from the recipient, no? How does the service learning is viewed by the recipient? Well, I would say that this is very important when you try to develop a service learning project, because that kind of service, that kind of act of solidarity can be received and perceived in a different way according to the way we are looking at the other. Let's say if we take a very traditional, let's say, which is a top-down view, you can consider the other as a recipient or an end user, which in this case, being a service of solidarity, is someone who is probably poor or a disabled or an outcast. And normally it is, if it's a university is developing this kind of service, they would say have some kind of a superiority, no, a stand of superiority towards the other, while we are developing instead a horizontal relationship where we are on a level playing field from the grassroots. So both who is providing this service and who is receiving the service are both at the same level, and they both have a need, and everyone can contribute, but everyone needs to receive, so both ways, and everyone knows, has a skill, has knowledge, he or she can share. And this pro-social or this social relationship, which is generated through this act, provides like a virtuous circle I mentioned earlier. But if we try to go even beyond this, when we look at solidarity and service, that can be also a model of encounter where I feel that the other belongs to me. If we think about Gandhi, I cannot harm you if I don't harm myself, without harming myself first. So all these social issues and social struggles belong to me too. I'm also involved. So sometimes I have to somehow try to transform the other with my action. But of course, it's very much linked to the way of seeing, of looking at the other, the way you do that, because it doesn't have to be like a welfare system. Claudia and Irene, would you like to add something? Because I would say that all of the questions are very interesting, and I would like to also thank Karina, because there is this is on the anthropological dimension, but then you also have the tools which are being used. Well, maybe I would like to just link to what Mrs. Karina said. I think the question is very interesting. However, if we consider that it is a mutual it's a mutual relationship. So you give and receive. Receiving and giving go together. So from an empirical and scientific point of view, of course, we cannot necessarily have two different lists, list of things to ask to the recipient or to the one who gives the service. We don't have this because they're both identical for us. We see them at the same level. I see that now Vincenzo Mascali would like to ask a question as well. Mascali, that's correct pronunciation. My question is for the group who has spoken at the very beginning. Now, I would like to maybe ask if it's possible to clarify the living form, which in Guardini is the main part, which allows for an encounter with people, with the other, but also which allows a certain opening towards God and also towards creation. So this is my question. Oh, this is a very long, because it would require speaking about the anthropology of Guardini and Guardini's anthropology, particularly in relationship with the whole theme of man, because in Guardini, man, God and cosmos are closely related and interrelated.
Solitamente nella lettura che noi facciamo della forma vivente, del concreto vivente, viene derivata dal fatto che noi conosciamo quello che lui scrive.
Of course,
Però abbiamo la fortuna di avere ormai da diversi anni anche il testo da cui
but of course, fortunately, we have a text because it's part of the monography, which is the essay on Christian anthropology. So this is closely linked to the way in which man basically produces this liberal relationship between God and the cosmos. So what does Guardini do? He basically goes beyond the old and he overcomes the dichotomy by separating the metaphysical triad. But Guardini does not do this in an abstract way. He does it in a very concrete way. He does it based on his personal experience, which is then produced through this system of the opposed elements or of opposition. So this living form is between the various poles which enter into a relationship. When the poles approach, the tension is broken. While the poles depart, the tension decreases. So the living form, and this is this characteristic which is specific to the world, to God, and to man, is this ongoing tension between the different levels. Now, of course, many see that only in human beings, but it is not only in human beings, but also in this whole set of figural totality, which materializes in the space-time relationship. But this would require a longer answer. But in my opinion, since the Christian look is a figural global look and seeing of the world in its variety and diversity, allows us to speak about a system which includes diversity without eliminating that, but instead specifying that. And this is one of the basic and fundamental characteristics that Guardini underlines. I don't know if Elena would like to add something. No, nothing to add. But Guardini has to be read fully in all its specifications, because they are certainly determined by all the material published in Guardini. There's a lot of Bonaventura and Saint Augustine, because they truly, and Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and poets and much more. Thank you very much. For the break, I'd like to ask another question to Professor Fiorilli and to Professor Agustin. They have presented a model of the global studies and of the interdisciplinary pedagogy, and then also the Universidad del Sentido, that is the universality of feeling. So I would like to ask them a comment on these two different models and future outlook. I understand that this model is active at the Sophia University, and the model of interdisciplinary pedagogy is already active, but also Fiorina, I would like to understand if what we are saying, if these reflections have an impact on changing the way of thinking and of teaching at university. Was my question clear?
No, aspettavamo di sapere chi comincia. Di noi.
Cominciare lei, poi
Sì. Poi non so se comincio io allora. Ebbene, l'Università del Sentido è prima di tutto
So the Universidad del Sentido.
un invito che Papa Francesco fa.
It's a call from Pope Francis to rethink at education quite often. So Pope Francis underlines that education has a very important role, able to transform people. We cannot modify the world if we do not first reform and transform education, not education as such, but the way it is taught. So the invitation is to in-depth analyze the meaning of educating in a transformative way. So this Universidad del Sentido tries to basically accept and answer to this, respond to this call of Pope Francis, which he has experimented in different ways. Now, what we are doing is a twofold initiative. On the one hand, trying to translate a dream into a project. And Pope Francis often speaks about the dream. Even in Fratelli Tutti, he refers to a dream. It's a pedagogical horizon, which is described as a dreaming pedagogy. But this dream is a prophetic dream. It is a dream that for a given interpretation. So within this experience, so there are a number of projects which basically respond to the call of the Pope in order to develop a model. This model is not a top-down model. So we do not start with the architecture in order to understand how it can fit in our reality, but instead it is a bottom-up. And we would like to launch an experimental cycle which includes different moments and also takes advantage of many of these projects. So mentioning Machado, this is an ongoing path. There are a number of elements which are very powerful on which we are trying to work. And let's say, what is what does students? It's student-centered. What does that mean precisely? This is a bit the background. I don't want to really be too long. However, what I would like to say that this has been done in a dialogue, not only in this kind of setting, but it is a dialogue with many counterparts. And this also dialogue is a very concrete dialogue. In the G20, there is one group which is working on the interreligious dialogue and also intercultural, because they're representatives of different religions. And so they try to basically better interpret the need of Pope Francis. So starting from reality. Now, of course, I don't know if my answer is sufficient, but it's just to highlight what we are doing. Thank you very much. Professor Augustine had to leave, so maybe if you agree, let's have 10 minutes. 10 minutes. break. So we reconvene at 5:54. So let's say local time. Consider 10 minutes. Thanks to all.